Welcome to a new series of meetings with creation and creationism, hosted by Alpha Omega TV. Our guest today is John Mackay, geologist, International Director of Creation Research Australia. Welcome today, Mr. Mackay.
As we say in Australia, g'day Romulus. It's good to be here.
Thank you very much, sir. What are we going to discuss today? Maybe shall we approach the evidence for creation subject?
Well, you've already said I'm a geologist, and I do get asked to do a lot of debates against professors, and the majority of them would have this idea in their head that molecules that you can't see over millions of years turned into good-looking producers like yourself. It's called evolution. In between you were a fish, a hairy ape-like creature, and now you've got bigger brains and less hair, and that's what's in their head. And one of the things I found very useful to do with them is, instead of saying, well, look, all the evidence shows creation, because they don't even know what the evidence is, basically. It's easy to prove with just a couple of questions, which I'm sure the listeners might find it handy to remember. And here's the first one. If creation was true, what would the evidence be? And most of them will get in a tiff and say, but look, all the biology books, all the courses, all the geology shows evolution is true. To which I reply, I didn't ask you that, sir. I want to know, if creation is true, what would the evidence be? And after about 5 minutes of really hammering that question till it sinks into their brain, they discover one thing. They've never asked that question in their life, which means they really don't know what the evidence means at all. They just assume. They've worn a set of glasses and they've seen the world through those evolutionary glasses. So my first job is to take those glasses off them and force them to answer that question. So I brought along something which I think you'll find interesting. Do you mind if I get it out?
No, but just what it is.
Well, it's not my pet snake today. It's one of these. You know what that is?
A boomerang, I guess.
Very good. You see, Australian is the world's international language. Everybody
Exactly,
knows a
yes.
boomerang. What's it famous for, Romulus?
I guess it turns back.
Okay, you throw it.
Yes.
I won't do it in the studio, of course, because I'd break a few cameras. But you throw it and it circles round, and it goes once round behind your head, and when you get good at it, it lands in your hand. Takes a little practice. The first time you do it, of course, you throw it, and your father has to pay for the next door neighbour's window. But you finally get good enough at it, and the interesting thing is, this is a remarkable object lesson on that question I gave the professor. You see, I found it very useful in my debates just to leave one of these sitting on the podium. And of course, everybody, well, they're listening to me, but they're wondering why on earth is the boomerang there? And of course, we finally get round to pinning the professor to the wall, and in the meantime, his mind has automatically done the following about the boomerang. You see, his theory says the black people in Australia who use these boomerangs, who throw them, they go all the way around and they come back, those black people evolved from ape-like creatures in Africa over 3 million years ago. And yet nobody on this planet believes boomerangs happen by themselves. So basically I challenge them and say, how do you know that? Because it really is, as I said, a great object lesson. Here's what's gone through their head, usually unconsciously. Somebody who they didn't see, somebody who they've never met, somebody who is not a part of this boomerang, somebody who exists separately from the boomerang, somebody who existed before the boomerang, and somebody who is smarter than this boomerang could ever hope to be, actually sat down and made it. Now, there you go. You better hold that and tell me how you'd know that that didn't happen by itself. You got any thoughts?
Well,
I mean, just look at the artwork for a start.
yeah, this is what I wanted to say. I guess there's no painting to happen by itself. So
how do you know that? I mean, you're middle-aged. How do you know that paintings don't happen by themselves?
Well, I've seen paintings. They're usually signed, so someone did them, and I've seen paint.
Now, you almost sound embarrassed to say something that's so simple and so obvious, but you see, everybody knows that paint doesn't do paintings by itself. And so there's one evidence that somebody who's not part of the paint, who existed before the paint, put this together. And your experience with that, even though you've got no experience with boomerangs, Would you like to suggest what this might be used for? Apart from playing with that.
Yeah, okay, as much as I know about it's for hunting.
For hunting.
For hunting.
Okay, now our viewers can keep that in mind, because here's the problem they need to think about. You see, it's famous for throwing, it goes all the way around and it comes back, but if it hits anything, like the next door neighbour's windows or the farmer's dog, it won't come back at all.
I never thought about it.
So therefore you have to use your brains to figure out what could you throw it at that you didn't hit but you caught. Now there's a good creative scientific question, and while they're pondering that, we'll get back to this. You see, a boomerang is made of wood, and the reason you conclude that this object was made, let's use another word for made, create. Now the professor is getting embarrassed, because you see, made and create are the same word. Designed is another word for the same thing. He knows that the Aboriginal took the wood from the tree and he shaped it into this boomerang.
Exactly.
And of course, the reason why most people can never make a boomerang, they get the shape right, but they miss these little bits, the nice little angles on the inside. See it there?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
And if you get those angles wrong, it simply won't work.
This is why it didn't work when we tried to
Yes,
make
when
it as
you
children.
tried to
Yes,
make
exactly.
as children, it didn't work because you didn't have the right information.
Yeah, but we hunted one another with, but never came back.
So therefore you've got a boomerang, you've got the Aboriginal's brain, you've got a piece of wood. And here's another way in which the professor knows, even though he's never admitted to thinking about creation in his life. You see, the boomerang is a 100% returning object made out of wood. And the wood comes from a tree. And when you throw a tree, it doesn't come back. So the fact is, here we have a 100% returning object made out of 100% non-returning wood.
Interesting, interesting.
Now, can you see a commercial proposition there? Money is also one of those things which is created basically out of nothing.
Yeah.
You see, it's not the wood that makes this come back. It's the design. It's the shape.
So
closer. It wouldn't matter if you made it of wood or you made it of plastic or paper.
Yeah.
It's the intelligence, the information. Exactly. So therefore, when anybody walks into a room, they automatically know what the evidence is that this was created. Now I see you've got a Bible there. In order to put this into context, would you please read us Genesis chapter 1 verse 1.
Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth.
Now I know you've had a bit of a science background, and you've also had quite a lengthy theological background.
Yes.
So therefore, since you also speak Romanian, and Romanian and Latin are related languages, what's the old two words that the theologians invented to describe the sort of creation in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1?
Yeah, creation ex nihilo.
Yeah, out of nothing.
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, we're not very good at that sort of creating.
Not exactly.
Not exactly, okay. But if you read Genesis 1 verse 26, you discover that there's a second sort of creating in the Bible. And we're not too bad at this one.
Shall we read?
Yes, read please, verse 26.
Okay. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth.
Okay, now I know you know your Bible too, because we've talked before this program. Can you tell me what God did to make man? He just didn't speak like he did when he said, let there be light. So therefore there's that sort of creation which is back in the beginning. But what did he do to make man?
Well, according to the scripture, he took dirt, and formed it into a man, and breathed into him the breath of life, and this is how...
So God took something that already existed and he made it into something else. Aha, that's what we did. You see, we took something that already existed and we turned it into something else. So when the professor says, creation is religious and evolution, that's scientific, he doesn't even understand his own science. You see, most of our scientific procedures involve us taking something that already exists and turning it into something else. And the smarter the something else is, the more money you can make from the project. So therefore everybody actually knows the evidence of one sort of creation in the scriptures. And it's simply this: the end product has more information in it than the stuff you started with. Wood does not go around in circles and come back.
Not at all.
Boomerangs do.
Yes.
So it's not the wood that's making them do that, it's the information that makes it do that. Now, of course, how much are you willing to pay me for this boomerang, Romulus? I need money. I've got to get back to Australia. How much are you willing to pay me?
Can we just get rid of the cameras?
So this is off the record. Okay, I'll take $1,000 or whatever, but in reality...
Not a bad price.
Not a bad price for a genuine artefact. I got this from a dear old Aboriginal. So tell me, but why would you actually think of paying me for this?
Because it has a value and it's valuable for me.
Yes, but where is the value? Is it in the wood?
No.
Because you've got wood in Romania.
Yeah, I could. Yes, exactly.
So where is the value?
Well, it's in the information.
Good. You see, what you have a look at in industry or any activity where we create is the bigger the difference between the information in the end product and the starting product, the more money you can make from it. Now, you can work a computer?
Yes, just a little bit, but...
Okay, now you've heard of Mr. Bill Gates?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay, now, in computer language, he starts with zeros and ones.
Yeah, he's good at.
He's very good at it, and he ends up with Windows 2010.
Yeah, and he ends up with 1 and lots of zeros.
One and lots of zeros in his bank account.
Yes.
Right. Okay, now look, how come? How much did the zeros and ones cost him?
Well, fairly nothing.
Nothing, that's exactly right, okay? And yet you pay $2,000 for Windows XP and all the other frills that go with it.
Yeah.
Now he's taken nothing and turned it into something, and you've paid for it. But you see, you're not paying for the stuff he's using.
Yeah.
You're paying for the information that comes out of his head.
Yes, exactly.
So when you have a look at the biblical account of creation, we see in our own experience what the evidence would be if you're brave enough to ask, what would the evidence be if that was true? What would the evidence be if God took dust and he made man? What would the evidence be if he took nothing and he turned it into something? Because we do the same sorts of things ourselves, and we just live in denial. That's one reason why I've got so many psychological cases. If you believe in evolution, you are denying the real world you live in, because every day you create cakes, you create cars, we are denying our own existence. Okay, go one step further. You see, for those listeners who are mathematically inclined, there's a very simple formula for recognizing a creation. Not you, of course.
Okay, good.
The information in the product is greater than the information in the parts. It's very simple.
Yes, even for me.
Even for you, that's right. But the bigger the difference, the more information has come from the Creator.
Exactly.
So if you start with nothing and you end with something, that being is very smart indeed.
Oh, yes.
Ah, now you know why Bill Gates is rich and you're not. Oh, sorry.
I guess yes.
But it's really true,
yes,
isn't it, right?
Yes, it is.
And so when you have a think about it, we do have even a mathematical formula to recognize a creation.
Yes.
So we recognize a boomerang's a creation, we recognize this glass as a creation, and we recognize the computer and the television's a creation. And yet the very people who do the maths of this and write all these lovely programs usually look in the mirror and say, aha, the evidence of millions of years of accidental changes. Foolishness. Because if you think about it, what is a human being? Well, do you remember the name of the first man in the Bible?
Adam.
Adam, okay. What does the Bible say he was made of?
Out of dirt.
Out of dirt, okay. So think carefully. A boomerang is a 100% returning object made of 100% non-returning wood.
Good.
If the Bible's true, what would you expect a good definition of a man to be?
Let me fix it. 100% of living being made of 100% of non-living particles.
Good. So when you're dead, what do you become?
A bunch of non-living particles.
Dust.
Oh yes, dust.
Ah, now you see, you can take dust as a living creature, and the dust itself doesn't do anything. But if you have been to art school, you can take that dust and mix it with plaster or water, and you can shape it into a beautiful model, a statue of a human being, right? Yeah. And then you'll put it in the oven and you get the temperature right and you'll bake it and it will come out and they'll say, "Oh, Mr. Romulus, famous artist, you know, we'll hang you in the Louvre in Paris," right? And everyone will be really impressed because of your creativity. You see, the end product is made of dust plus your skill.
Exactly.
It's not the dust that decided this would be the world's best sculpture, right?
Exactly.
It's your information. You could have turned the dust into a children's mud pie.
Exactly.
Right? The dust doesn't determine anything. And the greater the difference between the information in the dust and the final product, the more credit goes to you. Question: what do you think you'd have to do to take that statue that's made of non-living dust, and you've very skillfully turned it into a non-living statue? How much skill do you think it would take to get that statue to be able to walk off the podium and join us here in the studio?
Do you want me to start to think about right now?
We probably don't have time.
Oh, no.
But you see, we're really beginning to answer that question by inventing robots. What is a robot? It's a 100% acting machine.
Yes.
Made out of 100% non-acting parts.
Exactly.
Right? Now we can take dust and make people. No, we can only make them when they're dead, can't we? We can only make statues. Yeah. We can take living people and turn them into dust. That's easy,
yes,
isn't it? Right?
We're good at it, unfortunately.
We can't do it the other way around.
No, we can't.
We're getting close, and the closer we get, the more we are learning about, well, man is a 100% living object made out of actually 100% non-living parts. But of course, that's a little bit cheating for those who might be confused, because you inherited your life from mum and dad, and they got it from their mum and dad. But you see, all we've done is just shift the question back to the first man, Adam, and the answer is he was made of dust, and God breathed into him, and God made him a living being. Okay, he made, in fact, would you read that verse 26 again, please, so we can make an extra special point?
Okay. It says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our own likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth."
Now, did you look in the mirror this morning before you came to the studio?
Well, it was hard, but I did.
And you said, "Oh, I must improve my looks before I come to the studio."
Yes, and I've been working quite a while for.
Now, did you notice something? What you saw in the mirror was your reflection.
Exactly.
Your image.
Yes.
And did you notice when you picked up the comb, it picked up a comb?
Yes, it did.
It did. And when you brushed your teeth?
He did it too.
He did it too, that's right. In other words, your image could do what you did.
Exactly.
But it couldn't do it as well. You see, you stood in front of the mirror when you'd finished and you said, "Oh, you handsome Hulk." And your image went. You could speak and make sounds, but if you wanted to understand your image, you had to be able to lip read.
Never thought of that.
It could do what you did, but only to a much lesser degree.
Very interesting.
So God took dust and made a living being, and you can take dust and make robots. That's the closest you can get. But the reason you can do that and the monkey can't is that it's one of the best evidences that man alone was made in the image as the reflection of the Creator God. Anyone who is a Creator God, his reflection, his image, is going to be able to do what God did, but at a much lower level. That's why we can create. That's why boomerangs don't happen by themselves. That's why we could make a boomerang. And for those of the audience who may be philosophers out there, they may recognise that what we've just done is a very upgraded, Australianised version of David Hume versus Mr. Paley. You've studied a bit of philosophy?
Yes, I did.
Just a little. Do you remember Paley's argument in England that if you found a watch, what did it mean?
That watch must have a watchmaker.
Ah, good. Because a watch is made of non-living pieces, and non-living pieces don't have any intelligence. They can't assemble themselves. And then there's the other side of the coin where Mr. Hume, who really was an atheistic thinker in Scotland, said, "Oh no, given long enough, every possible combination will occur, And therefore, when you come to living creatures, life is an inevitable result of the properties of the universe. Quite the opposite of Mr. Paley. Of course, David Hume lived before we could run all these fancy chemistry experiments and try to make amino acids in test tubes. And of course, if he'd lived long enough, I would delight in debating the man with some of our evidence, because you are familiar with the latest theories of evolution, aren't you?
Yes, quite a bit.
You see, the theory says carbon molecules, or atoms, and hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen, somehow, as a result of the properties of the universe, got together in a meaningful way, and voila, there you are.
C'est moi.
Huh? Yeah. Okay, so that's their argument. Now, can you see where they just got caught out? Or have I said it too fast for you? Now, if you can't, don't apologise, because the average professor can't either. It's gone.
I feel much better.
You feel much better now? That's good. I'm glad. And the average student never sees it, even though every day they're reading the evidence that Mr. Paley is right and Mr. Hume is absolutely wrong, and the evolutionary theory shoots itself in the foot with a Magnum 44, right? Big hole, right? And all the toes are gone. In reality, think carefully. Mr. Paley was right.
Yes.
You recognise a watchmaker because the bits in the watch are alive or dead.
Well, the bits are dead.
They're dead, so they can't organise themselves.
No, they can't.
But you see, the theory of evolution says the bits are made of carbon and nitrogen and hydrogen and oxygen, and they are alive or dead.
They're dead.
Same argument. You see, they can't organise themselves either. So when I go to the Gunflint Shales in Canada, which are regarded by the evolutionists as over 3 billion years old, right? That's
not that young anymore.
No, you aren't that young, but you're not that old. And you slice the cherts, and you look in there and you see tiny little cells, and your brain goes, aha, I recognise these. There's bacteria and there's algae, right? So even if you thought these were the oldest examples of cells on the planet, what you find is that they're all beautifully organised.
Yes.
And they are 100% organised creatures made out of 100% non-organised parts. That's why when you succeed in making life in a test tube, guess what award you're going to get? Free trip to Australia? Mercedes-Benz? Half a dozen chickens?
Can I have all three?
Well, there is one outstanding award which you would be given by a Nobel committee.
The Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize, right. Not just the honour, lots of cash too. And in fact, if you did make life in a test tube, why do you think they would award it to you?
Because I guess I would be the creator or creator.
Good. You see, they're really recognising your ability to take non-living matter and organise it in a way that it cannot organise itself, right? So that you provided the information, and that's what the Nobel Prize would recognise, your creative intelligence. And so again, I want to get back to the very thing we started with. When people say, oh, look, all the evidence proves evolution, don't go on the defensive. Stand up and say, look, stop. Have you ever thought of this question? What would the evidence be that would prove creation? Because they won't have. And in fact, here's a corollary. If you don't ask the right questions, you will never get the right answers. So if you want the right answers, you have to find out what the right questions are. Excellent. And if you only ask the wrong questions, don't ever expect to get anywhere near the right answers. So always be brave enough to force your opponent to admit, here is a question they haven't answered, and you'll find the evidence is all around them.
Well, Mr. Mackay, let me ask you as a wrap-up of everything you said today. So many times we need to make choices.
Yes.
And sometimes we have just one bit of something to either choose for ourselves or let it to someone else. If this bit of something right in the middle is called evidence, this evidence would point either towards creation, or towards evolution. Now, are the evidences pointing onto what?
Well, you find all the evidence in this room. Anybody who walks in knows immediately everything in this room didn't happen by itself. The evidence here points to creation, but more than that, to the fact that there was a creator or creators of this room. And the whole universe shows exactly the same evidence on a huge scale, which just doesn't point to creation, because the ultimate choice is not creation or evolution. The ultimate choice is a creator or chance.
Excellent.
That's the ultimate choice.
Excellent.
And of course this brings it down to the crunch point. I mean, think of Mr. Bill Gates creating all his millions of dollars. What right has he got to put such a strong copyright on his product so that you can't even get your second computer to talk to the first one? The answer is, he is the creator of the object. He has that inherent right to make the rules. So when we live on the planet which was designed by the Creator, despite the fact that we've messed it up, the Bible says we've sinned, it is His, and we will be held accountable to Him, and He does have the right to make the rules, and we have no right to break them.
This would lead me to our tiny core. Just to give our listeners and our viewers something to leave with. Do we have touchable, in our hand, evidence that we could handle over or take away from someone and say, well, this is our evidence that we can carry in our little hearts, the pockets of our little hearts, just for the little man, little lady, little Tommy at the school, little Jeanette at the kindergarten. Oh, this is what God gave me to show you, and this is evidence. But is there any such a thing you would give to our viewers, Mr. Mackay?
Well, if we're talking about the little children in school, I'll give you an illustration that might be very helpful for them. You have girls in this country?
Well, we do.
We have girls in Australia too, and I've noticed they're a little different from boys. You see, they're a little bit less environmentally friendly. They go to school and they'll pick a flower, and they take the petals and they go, he loves me, he loves me not. Do they do that here?
Oh, I never did that. No, we didn't.
Now, have you ever seen any little girl walking along and picking up the petals and putting the flower back together again?
I wish I could, but I never did.
Because you see, in that flower is the evidence that the person who's pulling it apart is not as smart as the God who put it together in the first place. And any time you try and copy anything in nature, whether you're a toddler or a genius at the university, you will get to the point of having to acknowledge that the God who created in the first place is a much greater and much more superior being than you, and you owe Him all that He is worth for His creation. Of course, the modern word for that in English is worship.
Can we say that the verdict of science is creation?
The verdict of the creation is creation, and the verdict of scientists should be creation. And in fact, as the Apostle Paul says, the evidence is so clear, they have no excuse.
The listeners, viewers, you're welcome to join us in the new program. Until that, have a very blessed day, have a very blessed time, and please join with us again to hear and to see the evidence of this magnificent, beautiful creation and its amazing Creator. Thank you. May God bless you.